Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. My name is Anisha Wandi binti Azari. Today I will be presenting about the fundamentals and the fixed exchange rate system. My part is focuses on two main areas. First, the concept of exchange rate and how it connect the global economy, and the second one is how the fixed exchange rate system work in practice. So let's start with the fundamentals. An exchange rate simply means the price of one country currency in terms of another. For example, how many ringgit are needed to buy $1. Exchange rates are important because they connect all countries through global trade and finance. You can see in this image how world trade move across different regions. Currency are constantly exchanged when countries import and export goods, invest overseas, or making international payment. When exchange rate fluctuate, it affect everything: the price of important goods, the competitiveness of export, tourism costs, and even the inflation rate. That's why exchange rate are often called the global link. They act as a bridge that connect economic all around the world. The central bank plays an important role in managing this link by maintaining stability in currency value, ensure smooth international transaction, and economic growth. So now let's move to the second part, the fixed exchange rate system. Under the system, a country officially ties or pledge its currency to another stable currency, such as the US dollar, or to a commodity like gold. This means the exchange rate is kept stable and doesn't not move too freely according to market demand and supply. So how does this work? The central bank must actively intervene in the foreign exchange market. When the currency value drops, the central bank will buy its own local currency using foreign reserve to push the value back up. When the value rises, the bank will sell it to local currency to lower it again. This continuous process keeps the currency value within a fixed band, what we call the preset parity. However, maintaining this stability requires a large foreign reserve, which act as a shield to defend the currency pledge from market pressure or speculation. So in summary, the fixed exchange rate system help provide stability and confidence in international trade, but it's also limit a country flexibility because it must always protect the pledge through central bank intervention.
Good day, everyone. My name is Ashwini Palaniyappan, and today I will be talking about the mechanism of floating exchange rate system. In this system, the exchange rate is determined by market forces, mainly demand and supply, without any fixed rate or direct government control. This is considered a self correcting system because it automatically helps restore balance of payments equilibrium. Here, how it works. When a country faces a balance of payments deficit, its currency depreciates. This makes export cheaper and imports more expensive, which helps improve the balance of payments. On the other hand, when there a surplus, the currency appreciates, making exports costlier and imports cheaper, bringing the system back into balance. The advantages of this system include automatic adjustment, no need for large reserves, and independent monetary policy. However, disadvantages are exchange rate volatility, trade uncertainty, and the risk of imported inflation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanishri Vijayan. Today I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of the fixed exchange rate system. A fixed exchange rate system means the value of a country's currency is tied to another major currency like the US dollar. This keeps the currency value stable and predictable. For the pros, it provides a stable exchange rate which reduces uncertainty for businesses. It encourages international trades, control inflation, and builds investor confidence. It also promotes economic discipline since the government must maintain stability and attract foreign investment because of its predictability. For the cons, it limits monetary policy freedom, meaning the government can't easily change interest rates. It's vulnerable to external shocks, requires large foreign reserves, and can lead to trade imbalance like balance of payment deficits and surpluses. So, in short, the system gives stability, but it also reduces flexibility in handling economic changes. Now let's see how the fixed exchange rate affects the balance of payments or BOP. Since the current value is fixed, it brings short-term stability to the BOP. To maintain this rate, the central banks intervenes by buying or selling the currency. When there's a BOP surplus, the bank buys foreign currency, which means reserves increase. But when there's deficit, the bank sells reserves, which means reserves decrease. Over the time, if the rate is overvalued, it can cause a deficit and if undervalued, it may lead to a surplus. This if this imbalance continues, the country might need to devalue or revalue its currency to restore balance.
Hi, my name is Jonase Johli and I will present about the pros and cons of the floating exchange rate system. But before I start, let me explain a little bit what is the floating exchange rate. A floating exchange rate is a system where a currency's value is set by supply and demand in the foreign exchange market. This system became common after the end of the Bretton Woods system and is contrasted with the fixed exchange rates, which are controlled by the government. Now let's move on to the advantages. First, one of the main strengths of a free floating exchange rate is its ability to adjust naturally to economic conditions. If a country experiences inflation or a trade imbalance, the currency may depreciate, making exports cheaper and imports more expensive. This self-correcting mechanism helps to rebalance the economy. Second, countries with a floating system maintain an autonomy over monetary policy. Central banks can adjust interest rates and manage inflation without the constraints of defending a fixed rate. This flexibility is crucial in times of economic stress or external shocks. Another benefit is that floating systems do not require large reserves of foreign currency to maintain an artificial exchange rate, which can free up national resources for other priorities. Lastly, floating rates reflect real-time market sentiment, providing investors and traders with transparent pricing based on global demand for currencies. Then let's move on to the disadvantages. Despite their advantages, floating exchange rates are not without drawbacks. One of the most common concerns is volatility. Since the rate is constantly moving based on market sentiment, short-term price swings can be significant. This volatility can make international trade and investment riskier. For exporters and importers, unpredictable currency fluctuations can erode profit margin or raise costs unexpectedly. Companies may need to use complex hedging strategies to manage this risk, adding operational complexity. Additionally, in economies with weak fundamentals, a rapidly falling currency can lead to imported inflation as the cost of foreign goods rises sharply. This scenario is particularly dangerous in countries that rely heavily on imported food, fuel, or raw materials. A flexible system may also be vulnerable to speculative attacks. Traders acting on rumors or sentiment can drive significant movements in exchange rates, sometimes disconnected from economic fundamentals. This can create financial instability, especially in emerging markets. So, these issues highlight the floating exchange rate pros and cons that governments must weigh when choosing their currency regime. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Kavin. Let's dive into the comparative analysis between fixed and floating exchange rate systems. On one hand, the fixed exchange rate system means a country pins its currency to another currency or basket. This gives stability for trade and investment and favors the prices for exporters and importers. However, it also requires large foreign reserves and limits how freely a country can use its monetary policy. On the hand, on the other hand, the floating exchange rate system allows the currency really to respond to market forces. This gives the country more flexibility to respond to shocks and lets monetary policy act independently. But the downside, more volatility and less predictability for businesses that cross borders. So, in short, fixed is stability and control floating is flexibility and market driven. The right choice depends a lot on countries' reserves, trade exposure, and overall economic goals. Next, let's look at a real life example. Malaysia's approach. Since 2005, Malaysia has adopted a managed float system. It instead of rigidly pegging the ringgit, the value is allowed to move, while Bank Negara Malaysia steps in when volatility becomes excessive. Why is this important? Because it strikes a balance when global crises hit, like the 2008 financial crisis or the COVID-19 pandemic. This system allowed Malaysians to maintain investors' confidence, sustains exports, and keep the balance of payments reasonably stable. This case shows that a hybrid system can bring both the stability of a fixed regime and the flexibility of a floating regime tailored to the country's context. Finally, our policy recommendations and what our group has learned. First policy recommendations is build up strong foreign reserves so that intervention is credible if needed. Second is improve coordination between monetary policy and fiscal policy. They must work hand in hand for exchange rate stability. Third is diversify exports. When a country has many exports markets and products, it's less vulnerable to currency shifts. Fourth is increase transparency in central bank actions. When stakeholders and markets trust the system, volatility tends to fall. Second is learning outcome from our group project. We discovered that exchange rate system a country chooses isn't just a technical decision. It influences trade flows, capital movements, inflation, and ultimately the balance of payments. A fixed regime offers stability but sacrifices flexibility. A floating regime offers flexibility but brings risk. The managed float or balance policy emerges as the practical solution for many economies. In conclusion, a balanced exchange rate policy promotes economic stability, improves trade performance, and supports sustainable long-term growth. Thank you.